Welcome to the IT Matters podcast, hosted by Opkalla. We're an IT advisory firm that makes technology easy for your business. Our vendor-neutral technology advisors work directly with your team to assess technology needs and procure the best IT solutions for your organization. On this podcast, expect high-level expertise from our hosts, plus experience-driven perspective from the leading experts on topics like AI, cybersecurity, industry-focused IT solutions, strategy, and more. Now, let's get into today's discussion on what matters in IT.
This episode brought to you by Cato Networks, recognized by Gartner as a leader in SASE. With Cato, you get one unified solution for SD-WAN, SSE, Zero Trust, and more, all delivered under a private backbone, built for speed and reliability. Say goodbye to vendor sprawl and hello to always-on security. Simplified operations and a future-ready architecture that grows with your business. Now, let's hear from Cato themselves.
The implementation of Cato was truly one of the most straightforward implementations I've been involved with in my career. With Cato, we now have a standardized security platform across all of our network and also on all our PCs, whether you're in a coffee shop or on one of our Swissport sites, that I can sleep at night knowing that my environment is secure and at the latest version. Cato are a true partner and one in my career has almost been unique and an absolute pleasure to deal with. They deliver on what they say.
And welcome to the IT Matters podcast, the podcast where we go behind the scenes with technology leaders who are making a real impact, not just with their systems, but with their strategy. I'm your host, Keith Hawkey, and today's episode is all about what it takes to transform IT from the back office function to a business driver, especially in a mission-driven organization. And today, my guest is Dana Staples, Vice President of IT of Revision Energy, a company leading the clean energy movement in the Northeast. Dana stepped into a leadership role at a time when IT wasn't yet the front and center of the organization. And through a blend of pragmatic leadership, cultural change, and smart technology investments, Dana has helped Revision elevate IT to a key strategic pillar. In today's episode, we'll talk about how Dana approached his first 90 days in a fragmented environment, what it means to balance internal capabilities and vendor partnerships, and how he's building a culture of empowerment within his team. He also shares lessons from his time in public service and how those experiences continue to influence his leadership approach today. Let's get into it. Dana, welcome to the IT Matters podcast.
Wow, thanks, Keith. That was quite an introduction. Looking forward to the discussion, and let's jump in. This is going to be awesome.
Well, thank you, Dana. That is what they pay me for. If I can't do an introduction, why even do a podcast, right?
Awesome. Off to a great start.
That's right. I was actually doing a little bit of research before we started today, and Revision Energy is a solar panel organization. You guys install solar technology. And I asked ChatGPT what the average number of days in Maine that were sunny compared to the rest of the country. And I was like, I wonder, I can't imagine Maine has more sunny days on average. And the answer was Maine has around 200 sunny days, maybe a little less than 200 sunny days. And the average, what do you think the average is in the United States?
Number of sunny days? I bet it's not too much different from Maine, honestly. It's just we get the snow, and other places get different types of weather. I would say, let's see, if it's 200 in Maine, let's say it's 220 somewhere else.
That's about right. Between 205 to 250 is about the average. So I was thinking Maine was overcast most of the time, but it sounds like you guys actually get some sun.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's a misconception, especially in the solar industry. I know when I personally was putting panels on my roof, I went into it thinking that maybe we would really just produce in the summer, because that's when you feel the sun. But the fact of the matter is, we get sun all winter. It's just that the days are shorter, and so you make a little bit less power then. And I guess the added benefit of living in Maine is that we get the snow. So you got to wait for the snow to fall off the panels. But, with the right roof, it does it pretty quickly. So lots of things to consider, though. I can't wait those sunny days, though, in the summer. Aren't they beautiful?
They are. Speaking of the snow, I'm curious, does the snow impact technology, impact IT in any strange ways where someone that's like an IT leader in Arizona doesn't really have to deal with? I guess they might get a little snow in the mountains in Arizona. I'm thinking maybe South Carolina, where we get very little snow.
Where I find that it makes the biggest impact, especially I would say before the pandemic, where remote work never really happened, was you get a big snowstorm and suddenly it's a lot harder for some people to get into work. We clean the roads pretty well here in Maine, but you get the right storm and, a 30-minute commute turns into an hour commute pretty quickly. And especially when you have, daycare not open and a school closed, so you end up with childcare responsibilities sometimes, and you got to juggle those things. But as far as actual like IT, I don't think that there's huge impacts with snow as long as you're not hitting too many power outages and those types of things. I think it's really just the weather patterns that you have to watch out for.
As long as the snow doesn't get in the data center, we'll be okay.
Yeah. I remember a long time ago, there was a data center at a company I worked for that got a little bit of water. And it wasn't to the point where it really impacted things, but people were starting to get pretty concerned quickly about whether or not this is going to turn into something. And, we brought in some fans and dehumidifiers, and it ended up going away, but people were nervous.
Yeah. And speaking about new situations, I'd love to talk a little bit about how you stepped into this leadership role at a time when IT could have became a more prominent focus in the business. And this is not unusual. There's a lot of organizations that are about the size of Revision Energy where you start off and maybe you have an MSP. You buy into different productivity suites. You have some cybersecurity in there, but it's kind of an afterthought. And eventually, organizations get to the point where they're like, we need a professional grade IT strategy. We need someone that's going to lead this charge. So it's a very typical evolution from like small and medium sized businesses. And I'm curious, what are some of the early signs that when you stepped in that you realize, some things, some of the things here we need to change?
Yeah, sure. So I think the path that Revision took for deciding to invest a little bit more in IT was, they worked with some of the remote consultants to do some of the help desk work that they had, and they ended up using a local consultant to give them some of the strategy lessons, and that consultant got them into a place where they started to develop a strategy towards moving into Dynamics. Microsoft Dynamics is, the backbone of our systems, really. And I think a little ways into that, they realized that the consultant was adding valuable work, but they couldn't hire the consultant. And so there was a need to move into something more of a full-time role. Consultants are super expensive, and, you can only really go with them for so long to work on a project. And so they brought in the role that I currently have. So I think one of the things that we learned early on was that the company grew from a small, it was just a couple of guys at first, and it grew and grew and grew. And over the years, there was a lot of people that had various needs in IT that had to figure it out. And so what you end up with is, disparate systems that are kind of managed by so many different people. And you find, hey, there's some redundancy here, and maybe not the most optimal solution over there. And okay, maybe we need to put some of this information together so that one system can talk to the other system. And how do we do that? And, it quickly turns into a problem that you need somebody with some expertise to come in and solve some of those issues. And I think that's really where Revision decided that they needed to make an investment. Where I see things get a little tricky sometimes is that, those habits of people that want to manage the systems by themselves sometimes forget, hey, we got an IT department now. You can come to us and we can help you solve those things. So that turns into, sometimes there's some decisions that are a little further along than you'd like when IT's brought in.
Yes.
So can be a little tricky.
Yeah, and the whole idea of making the IT department feel as if it's an enabler instead of a disabler is a cultural shift that many IT leaders, from working at small to large enterprise, all across the board, that is the paramount challenge.
I mean, ultimately, we're a cost center, so we're charging the company to be here, and so we're not bringing in the profits. So ultimately, you want the folks that are bringing in the profits to be working on figuring out how to do that rather than to solve IT issues. And I think that's the crux of the issue: is how do we focus people to do the things that they're best at. And to get those people out of the weeds of issues that they may or may not be, equipped to solve. And so you put the right people in a room, and a lot of times you kind of figure out, all right, this person's got this issue and this person's got that one. It turns into a pretty good environment when you have a collaborative team.
And you probably arrived with some, there was certainly some motivation from the business to make some significant investments in IT. And one of your challenges is what are some of the first initiatives that should be prioritized to help show the value of those investments? I'm curious about kind of your thought process, what the lay of the land was. What were some of the first initiatives that you thought would be simple enough to implement, yet be able to show a quick ROI on those investments?
Sure. Well, I think the biggest thing you have to focus on right away is figuring out, what are you working with? Doing some sort of an inventory of the systems and the maybe not even necessarily the systems, but what problems are you trying to solve for those systems? And what are the challenges of the company, and how do the systems actually solve those challenges? So I think that's part of the initial look at things, is just like, where are we? How did we get where we are? And so, after doing all of that and doing a deep dive into what are we using here and why, you figure out quickly that, at least at my company, we had a position where we had just implemented a new CRM, and that CRM was working really well, but there were still some things that weren't necessarily handled inside of that CRM. So some business processes that we were trying to capture, and that work was being done on the side someplace with spreadsheets, or a little bit of sticky glue just to put everything together and make something work. And so I think we enabled some of those things to be done inside of Dynamics with a little bit of actual, engineering work to make some of those changes. And that was a big win, I think, as far as, making people not have to do a lot of the swivel chair stuff where they're in 6 different systems to do one thing that really should just be in one system. And one of the other things that we've been doing is we have a few different business units, and trying to figure out how to get those business units to talk and be able to, pass a project from one team to another without having to jump through a lot of hoops. And so, those types of things, that's really what happens when you have a disjointed system, is that, one business unit doesn't really talk to the other one all that well. And I would be remiss to say that I came in and solved all those issues. I mean, the team's been doing awesome work, and we still have a long way to go. But we've made some good progress. And so, I think that's probably where we're going to focus a lot of our work in the future, is to try to make that story even better.
Yeah, and a lot of I can imagine you had some pretty disjointed vendor relationships that are they were there when you got there. Part of your challenge is kind of understanding. All right, we are bringing in some IT talent. There's an investment where obviously your role, potentially some roles that you would help support in IT. Some of that might encroach on some of the vendor relationships. Perhaps there's an MSP involved. I'm wondering, like, how do you balance the new motivation to insource some of the IT with what still needs to be outsourced, with capabilities?
Yeah. So, I mean, part of that is figuring out what do we have for vendor relationships and what work are they doing. So, for instance, we have a couple different relationships with a few different vendors. We found out pretty quickly that one of the vendors was being used primarily for your bigger projects, and so we maintained a relationship with them because we had another project that we really wanted to accomplish to bring one of our basically redo the Dynamics implementation that one of our business units is using just to better fit with the other ones, and so that relationship is ongoing, and it's been a pretty successful one. We had another relationship that was it was a vendor that was kind of doing a lot of ongoing work, and it was stuff that just kept coming and coming, and it wasn't really project based. It was just maintenance and all of that. And from that one, we found that over the course of a year, we would easily spend more in vendor fees than we would in like full-time salary. So we hired a person to do some of that work, and still coming up to speed on some things, but that's proving out to be a pretty good move, I think. And that person is able to do some other things that the vendor wasn't doing before, and so it's even it's a win there as well.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of times, like those vendors that when these organizations are evolving in this sense, there are relationships. There are maybe they've been there since the inception of the company, and they've grown in some capacity. And I know for one, a lot of times they have some understanding of kind of where the bodies are buried of some of the inner workings of the company that is useful. There's always this kind of give and take of trying to pry some of the information out of them. So perhaps you can look for a better situation or insource some of that talent, maybe even a better vendor partner that has more capabilities. But it's like there's always this kind of give and take in the beginning as you're starting to try to uncover as much information that the vendor has, because they've been there since the beginning.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the challenges, right? I mean, obviously, if a vendor's been working with a company for a while, they've got a lot of that legacy knowledge that you just necessarily won't find on your own sometimes. With the vendor that I was just talking about, we maintain a relationship with that vendor even now, and it's more of a, well, sometimes stuff breaks and we need to fix quickly, and it's good to have a person in there that knows like how did that get created and why is this problem happening now, and so you maintain some of those things and not necessarily bring the same number of hours to that vendor that you did in the past, but you still have that ability that if something comes up that, hey, we really need some help here, they're still around for you. Sometimes that ends up costing a little bit more because the hours, if you're not using as many hours, it's not necessarily the best price that you had before, but it's still important. I think those things are good, and sometimes you never know, you might go back to them for another project anyway, so no sense in burning a bridge.
Yeah, and there are times those vendors can absolutely save the day because they do have that legacy knowledge. So having strong vendor partner relationships is one of the keys, in my opinion, to any success of an IT leader, especially new in the role. leveraging that?
When it comes down to it, an IT leader is, or any leader, the biggest piece of anything is relationships, right? And so I think if you want to be successful in a leadership role, you have to be really good at knowing how to work with people and maintain relationships and keep those types of things working well. I think it's always a challenge, right? Because you have different motivating factors that are driving you every day, right? So everybody that you work with is going to have their own thing that they need to get done, and sometimes that may not align with what you need, but I think building those relationships a lot of times can get you out of some sticky situations if they come up, because they're always going to come up.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that stood out to me was the way that you view enabling your people. Particularly the idea of kind of getting out of the way of your team innovating and being able to do their jobs. Can you talk a little bit about how you've empowered your team and what your vision of leadership, technology leadership looks like in your organization? Yeah,
absolutely. So I believe really strongly that you hire people to do a role, and once you hire them, you should let them do it. And so to me, what that means is I don't necessarily always need to be there in the room, looking over your shoulder, making sure you're doing the work, And so if I tell a team that we need a project done, and they go and they look into it and they figure it out and they give me a project plan, I look at it, you approve the project plan, then you let them do it. You get a periodic check-in once in a while to see how that's going and make sure that things are on track. But I try not to get buried in the weeds on the everyday stuff. As long as you give people the ability to go and do what you've asked them to do, a lot of times that's when you see people thrive and come up with situations and solutions that you may not have noticed or expected in the past. And I think that really empowering people to do the jobs that you're really hoping that they do creates really good work and allows people to thrive. And build skills that they may not have had before. So I think, if you give one person an assignment and you just let them go and do it, a lot of times they have to learn a little bit of project management skills to figure out, well, how do I get the things done that I need to get done? And the same kind of thing happens with a team and a manager. You give a manager something to do and they're going to figure out, well, how do I best to my team to get the things done in the right amount of time? I had a manager once that really helped me get out of the weeds and enabled me to allow the team to do the work. And I think that allowed me to scale the team and have a bigger team. As more people came into my org, I was a little less focused on every single thing that they did and more focused on, well, what are the results? How did you guys get to where you are? And what are the steps that you took to get there? And where did things go wrong? And how are we going to do something better in the future? Those types of things, I've worked with managers in the past that are, I hate the word, but micromanagers sometimes that are in a little bit too much. And sometimes you wonder, well, do you want to do this work or do you want me to do the work? And so I learned from that as a way to, let people do the things that you ask them to do and see how it goes. And if it doesn't work, then you have to course correct, right? And then what does that look like? It can be different for everybody. Sometimes you get a situation where you really have to jump in and say, okay, no, this is what I expect. And this is how I think maybe you should do it. But that's not where I want to start. That's a thing that you only do when you really need to.
You've probably had the opportunity to work with some of our younger generations, particularly Gen Z. And I always like to ask IT leaders, because some struggle with some of the generational differences between kind of the newer generation of IT practitioners and the old guard. What have you learned along the way to get the most out of like new, fresh college grads getting into the IT space? How have you best enabled them? And do you notice much of a difference between someone that's graduating college today and 10 years ago?
I think that for the most part, people have the same motivations. They're in this work because they enjoy it and they want to do it, or maybe they're just good at it and they really want to thrive and learn new things. I find that, generationally, people work differently. So, maybe your older generation, I guess if we're talking in generational terms, your boomers, your Gen X, they're probably a little bit more prone to wanting a meeting to talk about something. Your millennials, Gen Z, those folks are probably a little bit more prone to wanting to do something via messaging, Slack, whatever, those types of things. And I think the thing that I've always found makes me successful is I try to talk to somebody and learn who they are and find out how do they like to work and meet them where they are. I think as a leader, you really need to be adaptable to different situations. Sometimes coming in and saying, this is the way it's going to be, is a recipe for disaster. And if you have a team that some people want to do it one way and other people want to do it another way, well, figure out a way that works and try to make sure that you're hitting the right methods of communication, the right project management, those things. The one thing that is interesting is, you get some people that work differently, and sometimes from that you come up with interesting ways of working that neither generation would have necessarily thought of on their own. So yeah, that one's an interesting issue. I think that as we see, the next generation move in, and you're probably going to come up with new ways from that as technology evolves. I think the younger generation typically is the early adopter, and so it's kind of a fun thing to find out, well, how are you guys doing this and what can I learn from that? Because there's always something that you have to learn in IT. And if somebody's doing something a different way, like that's my cue to find out what is that and is it good? Like, let's figure out, like, maybe there's a better way to do it, or maybe there's something that I'm currently doing that I can do better. And I just love that about this job.
I imagine today, and especially going into the future, that you're going to be interviewing new candidates for a role, and maybe they're coming out of college, maybe they have a couple years of experience, but you'll ask them, how would you solve this problem? How would you solve this problem? And a lot of the ways that they're solving problems are using different artificial intelligence platforms. And that's a different way of going about IT. For one, you have to have an understanding of the fundamentals, but also the element of, I use these various AI platforms to help solve these complex IT troubleshooting issues, and introducing that into the mix. Teaching the manager about how these different platforms can help, and maybe how they construct their prompting and get the most out of it. I can imagine that being a pretty seismic change when it comes to interviewing of this generational institutional knowledge divide, because that's their world.
Yeah, I think it's an exciting proposition to think about what the work world will look like in the next 5-10 years, especially with AI and its introduction into the workforce. I really look to really anybody that's using AI as a place of curiosity, really, and like, well, what are you doing with it? Like, how do we learn from what you're doing, and like, what are the things that you're doing with this that we can replicate and get other people to do? I try not to shy away from that stuff, right? I think there's a lot of opportunity, especially with a new technology there. You want to be a little careful with it, right? You don't want to do unsafe things. So there's a little bit of a security that some best practices that you want to try and adopt. I think it's really interesting from a technical standpoint to understand like how much better can we be with AI? Like what are the things that we can learn from it, and like how do we grow? It's interesting though when you bring up interviewing people and their approach to solving problems with AI. I know that back in some of the early stages of the pandemic, I was doing a lot of interviewing at the time, and I started seeing people with virtual interviews kind of looking up they're looking up answers, right? So
Yeah.
asking a question and like you could almost hear them typing. And
that is a real problem. So one of my good friends interviews, he's in HR, he interviews for roles in IT for a pretty large bank here in Charlotte. In IT, a lot of these roles potentially are from people that are just coming into the country, that are new here, and they have different work visa situations that are sensitive and you can't ask about, but he speaks with lots of different people, and his job is to really cut through the noise very quickly and to ask them very specifically about certain projects that they have in their resumes. Because nowadays resumes, a lot of them are just copy and paste exactly what the job post is, and they put it in the ChatGPT, and ChatGPT writes exactly what is on there. So all these resumes look the same, so it's difficult to filter. And it's that the challenge is asking these probing questions and understanding enough about what your candidate potentially has been working on to know if they really worked on those things, if they had that experience. And he's been in situations where there's someone in the background, like they'll go on mute, and then that person will like answer the question to the person interviewing. That person will unmute and then regurgitate or try to regurgitate an answer. But you'll catch it somewhat. There's been situations where there's like one person that kind of knows what they're doing, but they manage 3 or 4 different people that have jobs they are unqualified for. Same thing for my wife. Has the same. She has the same issues with her job. Really, it's because there's a lot of unqualification, and especially with the remote work in IT, I feel.
Yeah, it's interesting. At a previous company, I managed a lot of people who weren't in the United States, and so when you went to interview them, English wasn't necessarily the first language that they spoke, and so I think that one of the fascinating things that I found is that there were a lot of people who were able to like really use some interesting technology to do some like translations, from English to the native language, and then they would translate back. And some people were really, really good at it. It was kind of impressive. I think some of the ways that you cut through some of those interview questions, though, is you just have to ask some questions about like, how did you do it? And like, tell me about like, what did this look like? And, some of those things you get from just talking to somebody a little bit more than like 1 or 2 questions, just kind of dive into it and like really figure out like what happened here. But I don't know. I think also like some of the things that people might use during a remote interview, some of the software that they use is kind of interesting. I kind of think back to, when I was in, high school or elementary school even, and you go to math class and the teacher would say, well, you can't use a calculator because you won't have one when you're older and working. And I don't know about you, but I think that didn't pan out. So in a remote interview, do you tell somebody you can't use AI because you won't have AI? I don't know if that's true, So ultimately, you need to have somebody that's really going to be able to do the work. And what tools they use to get the job done sometimes doesn't necessarily disqualify them from the position. If they're producing results that are really good and like it's not just a flash in the pan, they can do it over and over, maybe it's not such a bad thing. I don't know. I kind of have mixed feelings about it.
Yeah, me too. So for one, and I have some friends in the industry that tell me these things, but when they're using AI to write code and then they have to solve for a bug, it becomes incredibly difficult when you didn't write the code to solve for. So there's a unique challenge there. And you come from a software development background, so you're probably more intimately aware of the challenges. Therefore,
well, yeah, it's funny though. I haven't been writing code very much in the last few years when AI got a little bit bigger. So back when I was writing software, I was doing it the old-fashioned way. I had to figure it out. But we still had Google, and back then, most of the things that you got stumped on, you could kind of solve with a few Google searches. But I think anytime you work on a bug, though, you really have to be able to read the software or read the code and understand what is this thing doing and how is it failing? What's going on here? And I don't know. Yeah, I think currently there's probably not a lot of AI solutions that are going to answer that for you. Although you have to hope. You have to hope in the future there's a solution for everything, right? So let's see if that comes around. I don't know. Maybe someday it will.
Yeah, maybe someday. We're getting toward the end of the podcast, Dana, and typically what I really love to ask is what do you think is missing? If you were going to broadcast an idea to every IT leader in the world about what you think is important, maybe not spoken about enough within your line of work, what would that message be if it could fit on a billboard or a cell phone screen?
Geez, I think the thing that has enabled me to succeed a lot, and I think in the scheme of things, I think sometimes I see this as missing, is what is the human side of this? At the end of the day, the people doing the work are living lives outside of the work. And how do you make those people's lives better? It's interesting to think about, what are the things as an organization that you can do to enable people to be able to live the life that they want to live outside of work? I think that a lot of the things that I've seen are, you see a lot of these anti-work, people that are trying to figure out what's the quickest way I can retire, and how do I get out of this situation, and job hopping, and lots of different things. And I think a lot of the answers to that is how do we make work better to the point where it doesn't make anything that you're doing outside of work worse. And so I think remembering that people are people is really important. It's something that if you work for somebody who doesn't understand that or pretends not to understand that, I think it can make your life miserable. So happy staff produces good work, I think.
Wise words from the legendary Dana Staples. Dana, I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us on the IT Matter podcast. Where can people find you if some of our listeners would like to reach out about some of your ideas?
Sure. Yeah. While I'm on LinkedIn, you can always get me there. That's probably the best place. I think I'm always looking at that. I love to go on LinkedIn and just see what people I've worked with in the past are doing. And so I'm always checking it.
LinkedIn. There it is. We'll put it in the show notes, everyone. Thank you for joining, and we will catch you next time.
Awesome. Thanks for the discussion, Keith. I really had fun today.
Likewise.
Thank you for listening, and we appreciate you tuning into the IT Matters podcast. For support assessing your technology needs, book a call with one of our technology advisors at opkalla.com. That's opkalla.com. If you found this episode helpful, please share the podcast with someone who would get value from it, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.